March 14th, 2018. London, Mayfair. The clock showed 3 in the afternoon, and behind the glass doors of the Whitfield Gallery, £50 million worth of paintings stared out at the world from white walls. When Ozzy Osbourne stepped through the door, he was certain he'd be out of here in 10 minutes at most. Sharon had forced him into attending this exhibition. Gallery owner Nicholas Pemberton's new show, works by modern British artists and so on, none of which were things Ozzy would understand or care about. But Sharon had insisted. Over the phone she'd said, "Go, chat with Nicholas for a few minutes, be polite, then leave. It's not hard, Ozzy. Besides, it'll get you socializing a bit." But the moment Ozzy stepped through that door, he didn't yet know that his 10-minute plan was about to go straight in the bin, because inside that gallery, among the white walls and expensive paintings, he was about to come face to face with someone he hadn't seen in 16 years. Nicholas Pemberton greeted him at the door, grey suit, silk tie, silver hair combed back to his nape. He was one of the most famous names in London's art world, and had known the Osbourne family for 30 years. "Ozzy, finally," he said, opening his arms. "Sharon said you'd be coming, but I didn't believe it. Seeing you in an art gallery is like seeing the Pope at a rock concert." Ozzy burst out laughing and walked inside. The gallery was large. High ceilings, polished concrete floors, a single painting on each wall with small brass plaques beneath them. The air carried a faint scent of paint and wood, layered with the lingering traces of expensive perfumes. A few wealthy clients spoke in whispers. Ozzy didn't like this place. Too quiet, too sterile, too white. "Nicholas, why are the faces in these paintings always blurry?" he asked 2 minutes later, standing before an enormous canvas. Nicholas launched excitedly into an explanation. Modern expressionism, inner worlds, outward expression, the artist's subconscious. Ozzy pretended to listen, but was actually looking for the exit. Just then, a movement in the back corner of the gallery caught his attention. A woman was kneeling on the floor, wiping the surface with a damp cloth. She wore a grey work apron, her hair pulled into a loose bun, and from where she was bent over, her back was turned to the gallery. Normally, Ozzy wouldn't have noticed a scene like this. Someone's cleaning the floor, life goes on. But there was something about the woman's hands. A movement, a rhythm, an image buried deep in Ozzy's memory, a feeling. He'd seen those hands before. But where? When the woman lifted her head, Ozzy finally saw her face. 55, maybe 60 years old. A tired face, but one that had clearly once been beautiful. Dark circles under her eyes, deep lines across her forehead. And those eyes, pale blue, almost grey. Ozzy's breath caught. He knew those eyes. They were the eyes that had shone at him 16 years ago in a hospital, at 3 in the morning, saying, "Don't worry, Mr. Osbourne. She's a strong woman. She's fighting." Maggie. Nurse Maggie. Margaret Connolly. The woman who wouldn't leave the corridors during Sharon's darkest nights, long after her shift had ended. A chill crept up the back of Ozzy's neck. The woman on her knees wringing a cloth on the floor of this gallery, where £50 million worth of paintings hung on the walls, had once held Sharon Osbourne's life in her hands. The year was 2002. When Sharon was diagnosed with colon cancer, Ozzy's world went dark. The doctors had said, "We caught it early," but the chemotherapy sessions wore Sharon down a little more each night. Ozzy wouldn't leave the hospital. He'd curl up in the narrow chair in Sharon's room, hold his wife's hand with his trembling fingers. His eyes would close at 2, and he'd wake at 3 to the sound of footsteps. Those footsteps belonged to Nurse Maggie. The others came and went with the shift changes, check the vitals, administer the medication, mark the chart, leave. But Maggie was different. She was the one who wiped Sharon's forehead when she sweated, who carefully watched the numbers on the monitors, who looked into Ozzy's frightened eyes and said, "This is normal, Mr. Osbourne. She's going to make it." And now she was cleaning the floor of an art gallery. Nicholas brought Ozzy back to the present moment. "Ozzy, would you like to see the pieces on the second floor? There's a Francis Bacon up there. Sharon would love it." But Ozzy wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the woman in the back corner of the gallery. Nicholas followed his gaze, saw the cleaning woman, and didn't understand. "Ozzy, are you all right?" Ozzy swallowed. "Nicholas, That woman. I know that woman. Nicholas raised his eyebrows. Margaret? She's been working with us for a few months. Quiet, does her job well. Why? But Ozzy didn't answer. His feet had already started carrying him toward her, his body moving before his mind could catch up. His steps were slow, the secret, merciless touch of Parkinson's weighing down his legs, but determined. His footsteps echoed on the polished floor, and Maggie looked up. 2 seconds, maybe 3. They both recognized each other, and in that moment of recognition, something broke across Maggie's face. Shame, surprise, fear, all at once, crashing over her like a wave. The woman quickly got to her feet, hid the cloth behind her back as though she'd been caught red-handed. She straightened her apron, fixed her hair, but she seemed to know her effort was futile. Ozzy had seen her. Not Nurse Maggie, Margaret the cleaner. Mr. Osbourne, the woman said. Her voice was trembling. Ozzy took another step forward. That familiar, crooked smile appeared on his face, but there was a heaviness in his eyes, a deep heaviness. Maggie, he said quietly. Maggie Connolly. The woman's eyes filled with tears. No one had called her Maggie in 16 years. I work here, she said unnecessarily, gesturing with the cloth in her hand. I keep the gallery clean. It's a nice place, good people. Maggie. Ozzy's voice was soft but firm. What happened? Silence. Nicholas watched from a distance, understanding nothing. Maggie turned her head, her eyes drifting toward the gallery exit, as if she wanted to run. I left the hospital, that's all, she said in a low voice. Sometimes life just goes that way. But Ozzy Osbourne had seen every kind of person in his 50-year career, and he knew one thing. People look away when they're lying. Maggie, please, Ozzy said. This time his voice was different, more of a plea than a command. I slept 15 nights in that hospital because of Sharon. You were there every single night. You worked overtime without taking a penny for it. You brought me coffee, wiped Sharon's forehead, told me, don't worry. Now I'm asking you, what happened? And I want the real answer. Maggie was silent for a long time. They sat down on a small wooden bench in the back corner of the gallery, beneath a painting. Nicholas watched with curiosity from afar, but didn't approach. The expression on Ozzy's face said that no one should disturb them. Maggie clasped her hands together in her lap. I didn't leave, Mr. Osbourne, she said finally, her voice so low it was barely audible. I was sacked. Those 2 words hung in the air. The expression on Ozzy's face changed. The last traces of his smile vanished, replaced by a hard, stone-cold look. Sharon knew this expression well. It was the face Ozzy wore the moment he'd made up his mind about something. Why? He asked. Maggie took a deep breath. It was 2014, she began. I'd been working at the hospital for 19 years. Night shift, always night shift. Because nighttime is when patients are at their most lonely, Mr. Osbourne. During the day, doctors come, families visit, flowers arrive. But at 3 a.m, no one comes. Only the darkness and the fear. Ozzy listened, without saying a word, without taking his eyes off Maggie. I had a patient, Maggie said. Her voice cracked, but she continued. Arthur, 78 years old. Lung cancer, terminal. He had no family. His wife had died 5 years earlier. His children didn't call. Arthur was alone in that room every single night. Maggie paused and swallowed. The hospital had brought in a new rule. Budget cuts. Nurses were to leave immediately at the end of their shift. Absolutely no overtime. A cost reduction policy. The new director's first order of business. Maggie's voice hardened, but softened again just as quickly. It wasn't anger. It was the helplessness of a broken person. But Arthur woke up every night, terrified of dying, Mr. Osbourne. He was reaching out for a hand in the dark. So I stayed with him after my shift ended. For 3 months, even though my shift finished at midnight, I didn't leave Arthur's side before 3 a.m, unpaid, because that man should not have had to die alone in the dark. Ozzy's jaw tightened. Maggie's words echoed that sentence from 16 years ago. I never leave my patients alone in the dark. It wasn't a slogan. It was the woman's life philosophy, and that philosophy had cost her everything. Management found out, Maggie said. Security cameras. They saw that I'd stayed 3 extra hours every night for 3 months. But it wasn't about overtime pay, Mr. Osbourne. I wasn't taking any money. It was about protocol violation, insurance risk, unauthorized patient contact. 19 years of a clean record, thrown in the bin in a single meeting. Tears slid down Maggie's cheeks, but her voice held steady. Arthur died 2 weeks later, alone, at 3 a.m. No one was with him. Ozzy's hands were shaking. Whether from the Parkinson's or from anger, even he couldn't tell. But what Maggie had told him was only half the story. Because while Arthur's story explained why Maggie had been sacked, what Ozzy truly needed to learn was what had happened 16 years ago during Sharon's treatment. On one of those dark nights, Maggie had done something. Something Ozzy didn't know about, something Sharon had never told him. And that something was one of the reasons Sharon Osbourne was alive today. Maggie rubbed her hands together, as if trying to warm them. "Mr. Osbourne, I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I haven't told anyone in 16 years, about Sharon's treatment." Ozzy's heart quickened. Maggie continued. 2002, July, after Sharon's 3rd chemotherapy session. Her numbers were dropping. White blood cells, platelets, everything. The doctors said normal, but I'd been a nurse for 13 years, Mr. Osbourne. Those numbers weren't normal. Maggie's voice shifted to a professional tone. The old nurse, even after all these years, had never truly left her. One night, at 2 a.m, I noticed an irregularity on Sharon's monitor. Heart rhythm. Most nurses would have dismissed it as a side effect of the chemotherapy, but something about it bothered me. The rhythm wasn't irregular. It was dropping. Slowly but steadily dropping. Ozzy's breath caught. He remembered that night. It was one of the nights he'd fallen asleep in the hospital chair. "I called the on-call doctor," Maggie said. "The doctor didn't come. We'll look at it in the morning. There's no emergency right now," he said. "But Mr. Osbourne, I didn't like that rhythm. Something inside me was screaming." Maggie paused, her eyes gazing into the distance. "I broke protocol. I bypassed the on-call doctor and called the cardiology department directly. At 2 a.m, without authorization, I summoned a doctor from another department. In that hospital, that was a violation that warranted disciplinary action." Ozzy was trembling. "And?" he said, his voice hoarse. Maggie continued. "The cardiologist came. He examined Sharon. He found that the chemotherapy was causing early-stage toxic damage to the heart muscle. If they hadn't intervened that night—" Maggie didn't finish her sentence. She didn't need to. Ozzy's eyes had filled with tears. His whole body was shaking. His hands, his lips, his shoulders. For 16 years, he'd credited Sharon's survival to the doctors, the medication, luck. But that night, at 2 a.m, if a nurse hadn't defied the rules, everything could have been different. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ozzy whispered. Maggie smiled. That old, tired but sincere smile. "Because it was my job, Mr. Osbourne. That's what nurses do. They protect their patients, quietly, unseen, unknown. Not to be heroes." Ozzy couldn't speak for a while. The gallery's white walls, the expensive paintings, the polished floors, everything had become meaningless. He was sitting beneath a painting worth £500,000, and across from him, the woman who had saved his wife's life stood wearing a grey cleaning apron. Ozzy pulled his phone from his pocket and called Sharon. She picked up on the second ring. "Ozzy, did you like the paintings?" Ozzy's voice cracked. "Sharon, I found Maggie." Silence on the other end of the line. "Which Maggie?" Ozzy continued. "Nurse Maggie. Maggie from 2002. Sharon, she's here. She's cleaning a gallery." He heard Sharon hold her breath. Then his wife's voice came through, trembling. "Ozzy, that woman. You don't know how much we owe that woman." Ozzy swallowed. "I know, Sharon. I just found out." After he hung up, Ozzy stood. He found Nicholas. "Nicholas, I'm going to ask a favor," he said. Nicholas looked startled. "Of course, Ozzy. Anything." Ozzy glanced toward the back corner of the gallery, where Maggie was sitting. "That woman, Margaret. She won't be working here tomorrow." Nicholas's face fell. "Ozzy, is there a problem? Did she do something?" Ozzy paused. Because tomorrow she'll be somewhere else. But today, right now, I want you to let her go early. And Nicholas, I owe that woman a cup of tea. Nicholas didn't understand a thing, but the look in Ozzy's eyes was not the kind that invited questions. He went to Maggie and told her she had the rest of the day off. Maggie looked at Ozzy in bewilderment. "Mr. Osbourne, what are you doing?" she said. "I don't want to lose my job." Ozzy gave that familiar, crooked smile, but his eyes were serious, almost pleading. "Maggie, you saved my wife's life. I lived 16 years without knowing that. Now I'm asking you for 5 minutes. That's all. 5 minutes." Maggie hesitated, but there was something in Ozzy's eyes. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't begging either. It was simply debt. 16 years of heavy, unpaid debt. When they left the gallery together, Ozzy took Maggie to a café around the corner. He ordered 2 teas, both plain, both without milk. Sharon always used to say, "An English person can be sorted out with a cup of plain tea," Ozzy said. Maggie laughed softly for the first time. There, in that little café, Maggie told the rest of her story. After she was sacked from the hospital, she'd tried other hospitals, but the protocol violation note on her record closed every door. 4 years of application after application, rejection after rejection. Her savings dried up, she couldn't make rent, and she'd moved in with her sister. Eventually, she started finding cleaning work, offices, restaurants, galleries. "My hands are still the same hands, Mr. Osbourne," Maggie said, opening her palms on the table. "Hands that once saved lives. Now they clean floors, but they're the same hands." Ozzy looked at them. Then he looked at his own trembling hands. "Maggie, I have a proposal for you," he said. "And you can't say no, because if Sharon finds out and learns you said no, she'll have my head." 1 week later, Margaret Connolly started work as a night shift nurse at one of London's leading cancer care centres. The protocol violation note in her personnel file was erased with a single phone call from the Osbourne family's lawyers. The first night Maggie put on her new work uniform, she stood in the corridor and breathed in the smell of the darkened hallway, disinfectant, bed linen, hospital coffee. The smell she'd missed for 4 years. She looked at her hands. No longer hands that cleaned floors, but hands that saved lives once more. 7 years later, at the end of July 2025, Margaret Connolly stood among thousands of mourners at Ozzy Osbourne's funeral. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. Years ago, at the bedsides of countless patients, she had learned to keep her tears in check. When the ceremony ended, she approached Sharon. The 2 women looked at each other. One had lost her husband, the other had lost the man who had given her a second life. "Mrs. Osbourne," Maggie said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." Sharon said, "Maggie?" Her voice trembling but with a smile on her face. "He didn't even want to go to that ridiculous art gallery, you know. I forced him." Maggie laughed. At the funeral, among thousands of people, that small laugh stayed just between them. Then Sharon leaned in and whispered in Maggie's ear, "He told me the story of finding you 100 times. He cried every time, and every time he said the same thing. Sharon, the most valuable thing in that gallery wasn't on the walls.